Damascus has fallen, if you listen to some. Damascus has been liberated, if you listen to others. As always, I'm here to provide a geopolitical analysis beyond the headlines you'll see in the news. And for analysis to be sound, the most accurate, I believe it needs to be coming from a place of neutrality, not playing into the propaganda of one side or the other. So let's go. What's going on, you may ask, in Syria? You want to know? Well, in the last 24 hours, the Syrian government has been overthrown. That's a fact. The leader, Bashar al-Assad, is reported to have fled on a Ilyushin transport plane. His current whereabouts, and therefore whether he's alive or not even, is unknown. This shock overthrowing of the Syrian government comes after just a few short days in which rebels from the north took several key cities, starting with Aleppo, progressing to Hama and Homs, and ending with rebel forces marching through the Syrian capital itself of Damascus, or Dimashq, as the Arabs would say. As the saying goes, sometimes in conflicts, for years it seems like nothing is happening, and then in a few weeks or days, years worth of things happen. I'll be covering what this all means on a geopolitical level in the region, and what's going on outside the headlines that you may see on various news outlets. What's going on beyond those headlines? The summary for the time being is things are not as clear-cut as they may initially seem. But we'll go through all of that soon enough. For now, we hope this chain of events leads to a Syrian state that serves its people, all its people, and serves them well. We hope outsiders, outside nations are not given the space to press their own agendas on the Syrian people and use the people and the land as a proxy for wars and struggles that have nothing to do with the region. We hope the Syrians don't have outside influences that put their interests above the interests of the natives. See you on the next one. As more details are revealed, one thing seems clear about the relatively unclear situation in Syria. And that is that this was not an extremely bloody, violent takeover by rebel forces facing off against the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. Rather, it is likely that this was pre-planned. Bashar al-Assad, according to several sources, ex-president now, was in communication with the rebel groups beforehand and agreed, in fact, to step down. He has now been granted asylum in Russia along with his family. They're already in Moscow with fluffy jackets to keep themselves warm. Very different, of course, from the Syrian climate he's accustomed to, I imagine. But he'll be okay, he's among friends. Now, the rapid advance of the Syrian rebels in the north all the way to Damascus in the south, hundreds of miles covered in the span of less than a week with little to no resistance, relatively speaking, further supports this narrative that this was all prearranged. So prearranged, in fact, that we even have details that the rebel forces, which I will now refer to as North Syrian forces, agreed in advance with Russia that Russian diplomatic missions and Russian bases on the Syrian coast, in particular situated at Latakia and Tarsus, will not be harmed or fought over. Accent problems there. A peaceful transition then from the Assad government that ruled for 24 years with an iron fist, a government hated by many Syrians, as former President Assad's government killed directly or indirectly hundreds of thousands of his countrymen, and he himself has been accused, along with his government and military officials, of war crimes. We'll have to see how that turns out. A peaceful transition, though, from him to another group. The question is, what group? Who takes power from ex-President Assad? We'll discuss this one in the next one. With the fall of the Assad government, the scramble for Syria begins. The rhetoric coming out of Iran and Russia, two key regional powers and supporters of former President Bashar al-Assad, suggest that recent events with the Assad government being overthrown, Bashar al-Assad himself stepping down, it wasn't a surprise, but rather was a discussed and agreed beforehand event. Forces aligned with Turkey in the north hold significant sway, as the North Syrian forces, often referred to as the rebels, were supported to varying degrees by Turkey. These rebels are the ones who came down and are currently in control of the Syrian capital. Two main groups are of note: HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The other is FSA, the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army, by the way, are the ones whose flag is the 3-star green, white and black that you might see being used to celebrate the liberation of Syria across the world. and good on them. They essentially, HTS and FSA, they essentially worked together to move south and take control as the government in Damascus was dissolved and Assad stepped down. So with Russia and Iran not using hostile rhetoric and Turkey in the north keen to minimize or eliminate further bloodshed in Syria, this, by the way, this is in Turkey's best interest, peace, because if for no other reason than to prevent civilian harm that can trigger further refugee influx into the country of Turkey. They don't want that. So with these three regional powers not hostile towards one another, Turkey, Iran, Russia, Syria stands a good chance of being able to emerge with relative stability and calm. One can hope, of course. The potentially destabilizing forces then? Well, Israel, funded and supported by the United States, and the United States directly itself. Israel over the last 48 hours occupied parts or further occupied parts of southern Syria, southwest Syria, a region called the Golan Heights. Literally Syrian sovereign territory, but Israel's there for no reason. Standard practice of Israel. They actually moved deeper into Syria from the Golan Heights to establish what they called a buffer zone, typical of Israel, of course. All their buffer zones happen to require Israeli forces to be situated in sovereign territory of other nations. That's their buffer zones. And all their acts of self-defense, fun fact, require attacking states and often civilians in territory other than their own. Standard practice for Israel, modus operandi, nothing special there. In the southwest, that's the Israeli situation. In the northeast, America too holds some sway, where they provide training and direction to a dangerous Kurdish separatist group called the YPG. Fun fact, America actually has, I believe, 900 infantrymen and 900 boots actually on the ground in Syria to this day supporting the YPG. You'll often hear them, the YPG, be referred to as the Syrian Democratic Forces, lol. This rebranding was done to make supporting them sound more palatable to people residing in America and other Western powers. They're actually a very extremist separatist group. But anyway, slap democracy in the name of some group and get America's backing, and of course they must be the good guys, right? That's how it works. Anyway, reminder that North Korea's name is actually the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So yeah, names aren't always accurate. Anyway, it remains to be seen what the US-backed YPG in the northeast of Syria and the US-funded armed and backed state of Israel in the southwest of Syria, it remains to be seen what these two groups will actually do. As for Turkey, Russia and Iran, the other regional powers, they seem to be supportive of the establishment of a Syrian governed, the establishment of a Syria governed by a group that would take good care of its citizens, the Sunni Muslim majority, as well as the minorities. We, of course, hope this will come to fruition, a prosperous state for all Syrians, led by Syrians themselves, and hope that this will not be hampered by other outside powers trying to use Syria as a proxy battleground against powers that they are belligerent against. I'll keep you posted with balanced, neutral geopolitical analysis, as always. See you on the next one. When the soldiers from the north entered Damascus in the south, the leader spoke of not seeking revenge, of building a new Syria that would be a beacon of light for the Ummah meaning Muslim community. His speech, held in a historic mosque in Damascus, was hailed as motivating, unifying by his citizens and by listeners across the world. People are on the streets in Syria celebrating. Syrians are on the streets in other cities across the world celebrating. And why are they in so many countries across the world? Because they left as refugees because of the Bashar al-Assad regime that's now been toppled. Syrians in Turkey and Lebanon are literally packing up and going back home to Syria, something they have been too scared to do during the reign of Bashar al-Assad. It's a momentous, basically, and joyous occasion. And for those who support the former government, even them, not all is lost. The leader of the North Syrian forces that took Damascus, like I said, spoke of unity. He stressed that now is not a time for retribution, revenge, Syrian turning on Syrian. Now is the time to move forward together. A nation for its people, not a proxy to be wielded by one great power against another. Unfortunately, America has suddenly seen ISIS pop up out of nowhere. Again, I thought ISIS was defeated. Apparently not. Whenever America feels the need to bomb someone, they bring out a scapegoat, and ISIS, of course, is perfect. To those who are often favorable to the Western narrative, I ask you, was there reports of ISIS all this time? Where was ISIS? Why is it that liberation in the north and the south of Syria suddenly has led to ISIS appearing from somewhere? Listen to this report, not from me, but from the US Central Command, CENTCOM. CENTCOM said on Sunday that it had struck more than 75 targets, including ISIS leaders, operatives and camps, to ensure that the armed group does not take advantage of the end of al-Assad's rule. Translated, America is trying to make sure this change in administration does not lead to their influence, American influence, being degraded. Try as they might, it will be degraded. I'll go into this in further detail in my next TikTok, but to summarize, this is what Syria looks like right now. Syria is looking to shake off outside influence. Not entirely, but relatively speaking, from where they were to where they're going, less outside influence. Previously, the north was influenced by Turkey, the east by America, the west and the south by Russia and Iran. That's an oversimplification, but it does the job. Each of those components I just mentioned using their proxy in Syria as a mallet to beat their rival's proxy. And just like in Ukraine, it's the natives of the land who suffer the death and the destruction, not the great powers or the regional powers behind doing the puppet mastering. But the new reality is one of a Syria not used as a proxy, or at least it's tending in that direction, like I said. Change takes time. Russia and Iran seem to have accepted this new position, this new reality that Syria will not be used as a proxy battleground, which is why their rhetoric, the Russian and Iranian rhetoric, has not been hostile, it's been conciliatory. As I mentioned in a previous TikTok. In fact, Moscow's now waving from the Syrian embassy in Russia the flag of New Syria, the tri-star green, white and black flag, not the current red, white and black dual star flag used by Bashar al-Assad's government. Turkey too is hopeful and stands to benefit from a new Syria stable and prosperous, as the two countries, Turkey and Syria, share a huge border and there are millions of Syrian refugees in Turkey, putting strain on the current Turkish economy. But Israel and America, well, the rhetoric and the actions are cautionary from them at best and hostile at worst. If we see any issues moving forward, my analysis says best believe it's going to be from these two players causing problems, kicking up a fuss and not willing to let go of their proxy or their influence in the Levant, specifically, of course, in Syria. See you on the next one. Quote, their lives are safe and no one may assault them, end quote. This is the message relayed in a statement on Telegram by the opposition fighters in Syria who overthrew the old Syrian government just a couple of days ago. Hot, fresh news right off the press. They announced a general amnesty for all military personnel conscripted into service under the former ruler Bashar al-Assad. This is huge news, by the way. It's the winners in this war have said to the opposition soldiers, we are not going to seek revenge on you. Come forth. Come. You've got amnesty. You're free. Let's build a Syria together. This is obviously welcome news. Announcements like this are a good indicator that the new Syria will not be built on retribution, for the crimes of the past, but will be a state of justice and prosperity for Syrians generally, all Syrians. You will recall that I mentioned in a previous analysis video that Russia, Iran and Turkey are unlikely to cause trouble in Syria moving forward. This was my analytical conclusion, or is high likelihood. Their actions and rhetoric indicate their willingness, at least, if not their overwhelming desire, to see a peaceful transition of power to build a new Syria under native rule of the Syrians themselves. No proxies, no BS. But that analysis is holding. But you will also recall I said two powers in the region may cause issues. Those are the western states of Israel and the US. Right on schedule, we have information reported by several news sources that Syrians in the northeast of the country, currently under the rule of the YPG, a Kurdish separatist group, have been protesting. The civilians there have been protesting, asking the YPG to relinquish control, let go, and leave power so that Syria might be united completely and can jointly be ruled by the new Syrian government. The Syrians there want to join in the celebrations, no doubt. Guess what the YPG did in response? In Deir az-Zur, the largest city in this eastern area, the YPG broke up protests by force and deployed snipers on rooftops. This, ladies and gentlemen, fun fact, are the faction that America is supporting in Syria, the YPG. No surprise there, America has already admitted to using airstrikes against 75 targets in Syria, likely to prevent their proxy, the YPG, from completely collapsing in the face of this liberation. And of course, Israel has occupied even more Syrian territory, calling their gains a buffer zone established for their safety in the southwest of the country of Syria. Their statements, of course, are not worth the stolen paper they are written on. We continue to hope that the liberation of Syria will gain momentum, a momentum that's so hard to stop that America will give up its support of the proxy it has in the east and allow Syria to unify fully. From an analytical perspective, though, I would say this is very wishful thinking. America is not well known for graciously backing out when they've lost a proxy war. They're more well known for keeping desperate hold till the bitter end. Then when all is absolutely undeniably lost, they abandon their local allies and steal away in the middle of the night with whatever they can literally carry in their arms. I'm not even exaggerating on that last comment. They literally did this in Afghanistan a few years ago, literally leaving in the dead of night and abandoning their local allies. If the Syrians are lucky, America will pick a dark night when the moon is not full and slink away straight out of Syria. One can dream. Well, a whole nation can dream. Analysis of past behavior suggests that America is likely to be the one to cause problems in Syria in the coming days and weeks. Why? Because the US-backed YPG, Kurdish separatists or Kurdish separatists, still control the northeast of Syria. There's actually 900 US troops still on the ground, if you would believe it. Will the US comply with the will of the Syrian people and give up its support for the YPG and graciously bow out of Syria? Yeah, probably not. If past behavior is any indication, the US will stick around, causing more trouble, more damage, and enable the YPG to hold on to power in the east of the country for much longer than they would if they were not US-backed. And then when all hope seems absolutely undeniably lost, America will abandon its allies and steal away in the middle of the night. I'm sure a great many Syrians are praying that the US pulls an Afghanistan-style exit like this, slinking away in the dead of night under the cover of darkness, leaving Syria to the Syrians. No proxy wars, no BS. Now, I'm an analyst, unfortunately, not an activist or an optimist, so I want to be informative, not blindly hopeful. But actually, there is hope that America chooses to exit Syria. There's an analytical reasoning behind it. The reasoning? Because Iran and Russia have exited. Iran and Russia don't back any faction militarily anymore. Russia is very likely to recognize the incoming Syrian government even, as the Syrian tri-star green-white-black flag is already flying from the Syrian embassy in Moscow. So if Russia and Iran aren't in the game, America may decide to exit too, as sticking around will mean the US is wasting resources fighting not Russia or not Iran. So it's not really a proxy war if your enemy's not got someone he's backing in the fight. You're just wasting resources fighting the locals. You might not want to do that from an analytical perspective. And of course, with Trump coming in soon, it's even more likely the US will want to disengage in favor of consolidating US forces for its great pivot to the east to attempt to rival and contain and potentially face the Chinese dragon. Time will tell. See you on the next one. In the last 2 days, Syria and what's going on there has been an absolute hot mess of confusion. You had people scrambling to decide which side they're actually on. That's how confusing it looked. I had literally hundreds of comments and many telling me that the US and Israel are happy with what's going on. Of course, this wasn't coming from an analytical or intelligence background like the content I put out there. So I knew better. Russia and Iran have failed, according to some of these comments, literally dozens of them. The US and Israel are celebrating. Here's the facts, they're not. They're not celebrating. If you've been following my content, you'll know that while most others were celebrating, I was warning that of the 5 regional powers operating in Syria, 3 of them were showing signs of cooperation with the Syrian forces that took the capital and wanted to rebuild Syria: Russia, Iran, and Turkey. They were smoothing the way for the Syrians to transfer power from Bashar al-Assad to a new Syrian government. 2 of those outside forces, however, are antagonistic: the US and Israel. 2 of them, I warned, would cause problems in the days ahead, and right on schedule, Israel steps up to the plate. Israel has sent in its air force into Syria, right, for what the Israeli media themselves are calling, quote, one of the biggest air attacks, end quote, in Israel's air force history. Dark clouds were looming over Syria, and the pariah state has its hunger for war, chaos, and injustice unfulfilled, and is making sure to destabilize the Syrian state as much as possible in the days and weeks ahead, likely. Why? I'll be discussing that in depth in an upcoming TikTok. So Israel is now bombing Syria. What's going on and why? This is a very in-depth, researched geopolitical analysis video of mine, the one you're watching right now. Probably as in-depth a video as you can get on this topic on TikTok within a single video. So bear with me and show me your support by listening to it all the way through, as that would help me reach new people with my informative analysis on geopolitical current affairs. I thank you in advance. So back to the topic. What's going on and why? What's Israel up to? Well, what's going on is the North Syrian forces that took the capital just a couple of days ago continue to give Syrians hope that good things are coming. They have announced a salvation government that will oversee the transition from the former al-Assad government to whatever the Syrian people choose in the months and years ahead. This salvation government has widespread support, by the way, from the citizenry, from the citizens of Syria itself, and from Russia, Iran, and Turkey, who have all already expressed support for the smooth transition to a new Syria from the old one. From a geopolitical perspective, this is worrying news for Israel and the US. I'll cover why it's worrying for the US in another TikTok, but let's go for Israel first. Now, give me 5 minutes of your time, okay? Just bear with me. There's a bit of backstory to cover, but I assure you by the end of this, trust me, you'll be well informed. If you hear me out attentively and fully, you'll have the full picture of what's going on, why Israel is doing what it's doing, and why it makes sense. My analysis will make sense, and you'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense why they're doing what they're doing. So, Israel is currently busy bombing women and children in Gaza. They've been busy doing this for 14 months now. Their army is tied up trying to cut Gaza up like a slice of pizza. Horrifying stuff, but not the topic of today's TikTok. As well as besieging the Palestinian territory of Gaza on one side, Israel have been stepping up their hostility in the Palestinian territory of the West Bank on the other side. That's also using up Israeli resources. And if that wasn't enough, they have been bombing Lebanon too, Lebanon, these last few months. They tried a ground invasion against Lebanon in October, earlier this year, but they got slapped so hard, so fast, they had to wrap it up with a ceasefire deal in less than 2 months after starting the invasion. So that's 3 fronts now, right? Israel's Air Force, US funded and equipped, is very powerful, which is why Israel is very skilled, very capable at bombing innocent civilians and flattening apartment blocks, hospitals, and UN schools, be it in Gaza or in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, or elsewhere in Lebanon. But they showed the world something important. They showed the world that when it comes to actual military combat, a kinetic war on the ground, their troops are near incapable, incompetent. Palestine has no formal military, just armed resistance fighters, and the Israeli army has been struggling against them anyway. All their sophisticated equipment and Western training seems not to be able to win them the ground fight. Against Hezbollah, the paramilitary in the south of Lebanon, which is in the north of Israel, they failed even more spectacularly, taking heavy casualties and retreating back into Israel less than 60 days after they started that ground fight. Like I talked about, them being slapped so hard they had to rush back. Here we come to the current airstrikes in Syria. Okay, now we get to the what's happening now. You see, regional powers, minor and major, have been watching Israel very closely, has been watching what Israel has been doing over the last year and a half. See, the US-backed rogue state is now more vulnerable than anyone previously thought. That's what they've watched and that's what they've seen. That's what's come to light. Their army can't fight insurgents in occupied or besieged Palestine effectively. The army can't fight Lebanese paramilitary effectively, and they can't stop Iranian missiles effectively with any degree of reliability. So they are vulnerable. At this point, to their horror, the Syrian civil war looks to have been rapidly wrapped up. A united Syria under the recently announced Salvation government would be a disaster for Israel, a nightmare. A united Syria is a stable Syria, and rather than fight each other, if they shake off outside forces and stop the proxy wars within their own borders, they would directly threaten Israel from the Israeli perspective. Directly, because despite the Sunni majority in Syria we're talking about now, and the Shia, Alawite, Christian, Druze, Kurdish minorities in Syria, the disagreements amongst each other are eclipsed, completely overpowered by their shared hatred for the crimes of the Israeli state against the Palestinians. So a terrified Israel scrambles the jets and proceeds to start bombing as many military targets as it could find in Syria. In the aftermath of the overthrowing of the Bashar al-Assad government, Israel is taking advantage of this interim period, where things are still chaotic. No one's really sure, no one can keep up. Bruv, the US government can't keep up, according to many news reports. They don't know what to put out in terms of press statements and whatnot. So it's a very messy time. So Israel's taking advantage by wiping out as much military capability on Syrian soil as possible. The good news? Well, the good news is it's just a stopgap. It's just a temporary, it's a half measure. Israel can't reliably, completely wipe out Syrian military capability now and forever. It's an alarm. They can damage a whole bunch of military infrastructure, but the Syrian people, if unity is achieved, will build back up and stand on its own 2 feet again as a state. And once they stabilize as a nation, the very next thing to do is to enforce the integrity of their internationally recognized borders. And I'm sure you know by now, because you're a geopolitical analyst yourself at this point, I'm sure you know that the Golan Heights, occupied currently by Israel, is Syrian territory. They will therefore probably want it back sometime soon. See you on the next one. American influence in Syria may soon diminish to nothing. It was already quite tenuous. The American troops deployed in the country were halved under the Trump administration, and Biden didn't increase the numbers back up again. So there's around 900 American personnel in the country. The US still supports the Kurdish separatist YPG group that govern the northeast of Syria, but sources on the ground and even legacy media is reporting that North Syrian forces, allied to the group that captured the capital Damascus, are making gains from the YPG in the northeast of Syria as we speak. America may very well not pour resources into the state to help the YPG hold out, however, as Russia and Iran's exit from the country leaves the US with literally nobody to fight with their YPG proxy. Furthermore, the US is steadily trying to pull itself out from all theatres of conflict to pivot eastwards in order to be ready for a conflict with the Chinese dragon. It's one of the reasons, obviously, why Ukraine is unlikely to find much support moving forward from the US in its own war with the Russian bear. From a geopolitical standpoint, America has less of an incentive now to stay in Syria. However, it may still feel the need to hold territory indirectly through the YPG in order to steal Syrian resources. In order to deliver democracy to the Syrian people found in the east of the country. And Israel, also being in the region, could greatly benefit from having Big Daddy USA, of course, and its proxies close enough to help if certain material hits the fan. Time will tell. But know that one thing remains certain. This transition from the old Syrian government to the new one, the new government announced as the Salvation Government of Syria, or this transition is going to be a bumpy one. Israel and the US may not let things go smoothly. We'll just have to see. See you on the next one. There have been a great many reports saying that Syria has not been liberated, but rather carved up between Israel and Turkey. Some also add in the United States into that mix. This is not accurate, and I'll explain why in this TikTok. First of all, Turkey provides assistance. I'm just giving you some context. Turkey provides assistance to certain groups in Syria and has been doing so consistently over the course of the Syrian civil war. These groups are directly or indirectly now part of Hukumatul Inqadh Syria, the Salvation Government of Syria, the group that now holds Damascus, the capital, and hope to build a unified, prosperous Syria moving forward. This does not mean Turkey will be carving up the nation. Rather, it is in Turkey's geopolitical interest and the preference of its current administration, based on the rhetoric and past actions of this administration, to ensure Syria stabilizes and Syrians govern it with justice. If this can be achieved, Turkey has a stable border in the south, after over a decade of not having a stable border in the south, and there's a high likelihood that Syrian refugees in Turkey will wish to go back to their homeland. Domestically, this will play very well for the current Turkish administration, and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan can take credit for bringing peace to the south and solving the refugee crisis, something the Turkish voter will love him for. Not too shabby before the 2028 Turkish elections. So there's no carving up of the north of Syria. We can dismiss that. Now, moving on to the south, the US-Israel part. There's no carving up here either. This isn't historic Palestine. Israel can't hold the spectacularly vast tracts of Syrian territory with its tiny military. They can barely keep hold of Gaza and the West Bank without their nails breaking off. They go into a ground fight with Hezbollah, the paramilitary in South Lebanon, and after just 50 days, they lose, crawl back over the northern border and settle for a ceasefire. So there's no carving up of anything here. What has happened is the Israelis hold the Golan Heights. It's a geographically elevated region that's very strategic. You can militarily control the surrounding area if you hold the heights. It's like being king of the hill, right? This is a territory in Syria's southwest. I mentioned this in previous TikToks. Israel will continue to hold the Golan Heights and have moved forward to secure their position in the heights even better. They have unleashed a huge... This is, by the way, they've been able to move forward and felt the need because when Bashar al-Assad was Syria's ruler, Israel was relatively safe. They didn't have to be properly prepared on the heights. No one's going to attack them. Syria's in a civil war. Now, Syria might unify. They're having to dig in. They're having to make sure we're going to have to actually potentially fight for these heights, which obviously are not ours. This is Syrian territory, according to international borders that are fully recognized. It's not ours. So they're digging in, which is why they're advancing slightly ahead of the heights. Anyway, what's more indicative of what Israel actually wants and what's actually happening is they've unleashed a huge air attack across Syria to get rid of Syria's military capabilities moving forward. And this is where some of the information I'm talking about will bubble up even into legacy media. Why are they carrying out attacks on military infrastructure? Because they know what I've been trying to tell you in recent TikToks. They know that they can't stop Syria from unifying, but they can delay the military capabilities of new Syria, potentially by years. They're hitting factories, they're hitting weapon stockpiles, they're hitting Syrian Navy vessels. That's the part that's bubbled up, by the way, to legacy media, which is available for everyone, not just people working in intelligence. These targets, once eliminated, would buy Israel, the Israeli state, more time for all the good it does them. And they need that time because a unified, stabilized Syria, led by the Sunni Muslim majority, but with a just and capable rule and administration, so minorities are cared for and support their Sunni Muslim Syrian brothers, would be very dangerous it would be a very dangerous neighbor for Israel as a whole, who has no doubt become comfortable with the divided Syria under perpetual civil war I talked about earlier. Civil war means Syrians had no time to look at Israel, let alone fight them. Now, under a unified Syria, all of the Syrians together might look right next door where, brotherly Arabs are being slaughtered in a genocide. And they might be like, that kind of looks a bit like something we should, intervene in. Obviously, the Gulf states, I don't even mention the Gulf states in my TikTok because it's not worth mentioning something so insignificant or unhelpful. But Syria, unified and not under the, payroll of America, not under a protectorate status like some of the Gulf states are, relying on American military, American bases for protection, etc., etc. Syria is not like that. So, much more dangerous for Israel on that front. This is basically, in summary, there's no carving up of Syria by Israel and Turkey. Right? This is just a false narrative that's being pushed by certain groups, especially I've seen, independent media outlets or individuals on social media. The legacy media is not pushing this narrative, they're pushing a different narrative. And then independent outlets particularly I've seen American speakers are pushing this outlet to make you feel like, oh, Syria is doomed. It's not doomed. Okay, give it some time, you'll see it's not being carved up. This isn't a backroom deal to carve up Syria between the West and Turkey. This is Syria's genuine liberation. The Eastern powers of Russia and Iran have accepted this reality and are awaiting the new government to see what kind of relationship they can build with that new government. And the Western powers, well, the Western powers are panicking. See you on the next one. New Syria will be run by Al-Hukumatul Inqadh As-Suriya, the Salvation Government of Syria. Very inspiring name. It's composed almost entirely of Syrians and it holds the majority of Syrian territory now. The US-backed YPG, Kurdish separatists essentially, were still in control of the northeast until the last 24 hours. Reports now suggest after some fighting, the Salvation Government forces in Damascus are now in control of Manbij and Deir ez-Zur, two key territories in the east, with the latter, Deir ez-Zur, being the largest city in East Syria. So it's looking like the YPG influence in the northeast is being wrapped up now. The new government appears to be doing well. The rhetoric it's putting out of unity and moving forward to build a united Syria for all Syrians seems to be holding. Not to mention the huge number of political prisoners unfairly, illegally held, being released after decades. It's a bittersweet moment. We'll go into that later. You've probably seen TikToks of fathers being reunited with sons after 20 years of their sons being in prison. You've probably heard of a man who went into prison as a teenager, now comes out as an old 50-year-old bearded man with white beard hair. It's tragic, but better late than never, of course, to free these prisoners unjustly imprisoned by the Assad regime all these years, all these decades. Anyway, it's early days, though, of course, so there's a lot that we will need to keep an eye on. For now, the analysis is this. The new Syrian government holds the majority of the country. The YPG in the northeast appears not to have been backed by the US like it previously was, leading to rapid loss in territory. And Israel in the southwest holding onto the Golan Heights, illegally, of course, but that's never stopped them before. They're not likely to turn over a new leaf anytime this decade. And they've even pushed further beyond the Golan Heights to further entrench their position, likely a defensive reaction to the uncertainty of this new incoming government. For the time being, unity is the focus, though, of the Syrian state. It is entirely reasonable, by the way, to expect that the new Syrian government will focus on stabilizing the nation. Once they have that sorted, though, it's also very likely that their attention will turn to the Golan Heights, stolen Syrian territory in Israeli hands. I would predict, though, that this will not be the focus of Syrian efforts for at least 5 years. You must, after all, walk before you can run. See you on the next one. Syria has resulted in a unique situation. A lot of people don't know how to react. Those blindly pro-Western who don't care about justice or fairness, they just want the West to win. They're happy, not because their proxy in Syria won, the YPG, for example, but because their opponent's proxy lost, the Iran-backed al-Assad government. Those blindly anti-West are upset, not because they care about justice or fairness either, but because the anti-West proxy lost, the Assad government. I've heard it all from a wide range of outlets, individuals, and intel sources within my reach. I've heard celebrations, I've heard weeping, I've heard people happy but fearful that this is just another Libya, but I rarely hear about anyone caring about what's going on for the Syrians. You have people jailed before they turned 20, now coming out of prison, bearded men with grey hair. They would have stayed in prison possibly until their death under the Assad regime had it not fallen. You have fathers seeing their sons after 2 decades of them being locked away underground in Assad's prisons. You have a man who thought Saddam Hussein freed him from his prison cell. Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, who was killed 19 years ago. It's hellish, guys. You're worried about what might happen. Look at what's already happened. It has never been sustainable or desirable. Assad's regime was a brutal one by almost any definition, regardless of which side you back. Now, Back to geopolitics. Syria was in a civil war for over a decade. You had the American-backed YPG in the northeast, you had the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights in the southwest, you had Turkey-backed north, and you had the south backed by Russia and Iran. The south, with the capital where Bashar al-Assad's government operated from, of course. This multipolarity has now been broken. The deadlock, where each side keeps the other in check, is now gone. But do not be fooled. The fall of the Assad regime may look like a loss to Iran and Russia, and indeed may be a loss to Iran and Russia, but only in the short term. Why? I'll share that in my next TikTok. See you then. In my last TikTok, I talked about why Syria has given rise to very unique reactions. There's a lot of pro-West and anti-West groups. Both seem to have a lot of confusion on how to react. You have pro-Palestinian speakers, commentators, analysts suddenly be pro-Assad government, and they're sad at seeing what's going on in Syria. Now, also, of course, Russia supported the Assad government. Lots of people have been saying, oh, I'm pro-Russian. I'm not. I'm just pro-justice and anti-stupid, and they're wondering why I'm not upset that the Assad government collapsed. Well, I'm not pro-Russian, anti-Russian, pro-West, anti-West. I'm pro-justice and anti-stupid. I keep saying this. And today I'm going to be talking about how the fall of the Assad regime, from an analytical perspective, may not be bad for Iran and Russia after all. Now, is that good news or bad news? Well, I'm non-aligned as an analyst, which means I'll give you a neutral, analytical take, and you can go riding off into the sunset and decide for yourself if it's good or bad news, or if I'm just making stuff up. Now, with Iran and Russia pulling out their support, and the US also potentially pulling out its support from these Syrian proxies, Syria might actually be able to unify, led by Al-Hukumatul Inqad as-Suriya, the salvation government now in Damascus. I won't tell you, I'll ask you a question, and you tell me, as a budding analyst, your answer. A unified Syria, governed justly and fairly by the majority, 70% of Syria is Sunni Muslim, taking care of the minorities. Well, 10% is Shia, 10% is Christian, Druze, and a combination of others. A unified Syria, something that was not the case for the last 50 years of Assad family rule, a just unified Syria. Who would benefit from that, other than, of course, the Syrians themselves, who may for once in the last 3 generations finally see the prospect of a prosperous homeland become a reality? One can only hope. Who else benefits, though? I'll give you a hint. Who loses? Identify that, and then you'll understand who might benefit. I'll tell you. If a strong, non-aligned Arab state emerges in Syria, non-aligned, right? Not a Western puppet, not an Iranian or Russian puppet, an independent Syria. Who would fear that the most? Why, Israel, of course. Israel has been carrying out a horrific genocide against the Palestinians. By ethnicity and by faith, the Syrians and the Palestinians are brothers. And of course, you don't have to be anything other than human to oppose the genocide in Gaza. That's why we see so many non-Muslims, non-Palestinians worldwide supporting the Palestinian cause, and much respect to those people who do. But I digress. Back to the point. If Syria unifies under a just government that's not a proxy, Israel is the state who will feel most threatened. Now we go back to my initial question. Who benefits then from a liberated Syria other than the Syrians? I'll give you one last hint. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. See, if Syria unifies, the new government is sure to be hostile towards Israel for its recent crimes and its state policies overall. The Israeli state of, that's a can of worms that we're not going to unpack in this one TikTok, obviously. The long-term crimes, the short-term crimes, all the crimes, all the theft. That's what happens when your country's built entirely on stolen land. Anyway, that means New Syria would have a potential friend in Iran. Enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? They would both be hostile towards Israel. So down the line, if unification of Syria is successful, if the country stabilizes, Iran might find themselves in a more powerful situation than when they supported the Assad regime. They might find that this new Syria, more powerful, able to operate independently, able to establish security, which encourages investment and economic growth. And this new state would still be aligned with Iran in opposing Israel. Aligned, not allied. Though an independent state, of course, Syria becoming, allying with Iran is not off the table. Time will tell how accurate this prediction is, but of course we hope, most importantly, for justice and fairness for the Syrians, who have suffered for so long And we hope for their liberation not to be hijacked by outside forces looking only for another proxy to swing at their regional adversary. One can hope, one can pray. See you on the next one.